He said, "I doubt myself all the time. My teams around me don't understand it. It's quite simple. I constantly question myself. No matter how many times you tell me I'm the best, in my eyes, I'm not. Doubt fuels me, and I overcome it."
Put that coffee down.
Creators are leaders. Be careful what kind of leaders you're producing here.
Helen, we're both in sales. Let me tell you why I suck as a salesman.
They realized that to be in power, you didn't need guns or money or even numbers. You just needed the will to do what the other guy wouldn't.
I'm not leaving. The show goes on.
Well, hello there, friend. Welcome back to the Construction Leadership Podcast. I am your host, Bradley Hartmann. Well, today, friends, I'm excited to bring to you something just a little bit different. I've collected these 3 stories that I've been thinking a lot about over the last month or so, and I thought I would introduce them to you one at a time because I believe they have some principles and some underlying beliefs about how the world works that can help you become a better leader, and I believe in one case, using some negotiation basics to avoid the worst case scenario. So these 3 stories are an eclectic collection, if you will. The first one is about a judo champion who's still living, who's still going. There's 2 statues of him in different places, obviously, as a testament to his greatness. So we'll talk about that. The second one is about the 3rd co-founder alongside Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak that you may not know, and how he returned an $800 check that would have been worth $320 billion. So we'll talk about that. And the third one is about negotiation and Sriracha sauce. Now, before you have a chance to consider what the hell do Judo and some unknown Apple founder and Sriracha have anything to do with anything in your life, all I gotta say is just trust me. Give me a minute. All 3 of these are great stories. Let's dive in. So the first one came on my radar from The Athletic. So this came out during the Olympics, and it's about this guy named Teddy Riner, who is the unquestioned greatest judoka. Judoka. That's a word I had not known. Apparently, people who engage in judo are known as judoka. Anyway, he is the unquestioned greatest judoka of all time. He's 6'8", 305 pounds. And if you look this guy up, he looks like Shaq, except a really good-looking Shaq, like Taye Diggs. You know who Taye Diggs is? Now, I say this, I'm very confident in my masculinity. Taye Diggs is a really good-looking guy. I also think Taye Diggs might be 5'2". I'm sure he's tiny. And Shaq is enormous. So imagine you take these 2 people and you have a giant 6'8", 305-pound judo champion who looks like Taye Diggs. That is Teddy Riner. Apparently, this guy is a legend in France. He's French. And for anyone who follows judo. Here's the quote from The Athletic. "But in the very particular world of judo, he is a figure so transcendent that there are statues of him already standing in both his birthplace of Guadeloupe, a French territory, and in France." Teddy Riner was a torch bearer for the 2008 Beijing Games, a flag bearer for the 2016 Rio Games, and partook in the final relay to light the Olympic cauldron for these 2024 Games. And as I mentioned, 2 statues, not dead. You know how hard it is to get a statue of you before you die? Anyway, he is 35 now, and he did not compete in 2023. Going into the Olympics, he was ranked 7th in the world. After his last loss in 2020, he said afterwards, "My career is already behind me, so I'm not too disappointed about it. I'm proud of what I did." Now, what he did specifically, he won Olympic gold medals in 2012 and 2016. He won 11 world championships. He at one point won 154 straight matches between 2010 and 2020. Heading into the Olympics, he had only lost 5 career matches. So the day before his gold medal championship bout, or whatever the hell they call that in judo, he sat for a press conference. And the article quotes Riner, shrugged his massive shoulders and said something you will rarely hear from the greats. He said, "I do not have the gift of confidence. I doubt myself all the time. My teams around me don't understand it. It's quite simple. I constantly question myself. No matter how many times you tell me I'm the best, in my eyes, I'm not. Doubt fuels me, and I overcome it." The following day, in the gold medal match, Teddy Riner won. It was his 5th gold medal. And yes, he is planning to come back to get number 6 to compete in LA in 2028. Now, what stood out for me is you see this human, you just see him. Picture 6'8", 300-pound Taye Diggs, judo champion, statues around the world, lost 5 matches in his entire career. And he says, "Man, I struggle with confidence." That blew me away. Now, I grew up in Chicago in the 90s in the golden era of Michael Jordan, and he also suffered from a lack of confidence, but he would never, ever, ever be that vulnerable. He would never say it. He would take these slights and he would choke them down. He would make things up about half-wits like Rex Chapman of the Charlotte Hornets, and he would fume and he would build this up into his mind, and he would go out and he would attack him, and then he would score 60 that game, and he would claim that Rex Chapman one time whispered to a person in a bar that Michael Jordan was only in the top 5 all time, or like some crazy, stupid thing, and he would internalize it, and that would fuel him. Yet Teddy is the opposite of that. He's fueled by doubt, but he's vulnerable, and he opens up about it. So why was this so impactful for me? Well, this is something that I'm going through, and maybe you're going through something similar now. I'm finishing up this project. Right now, it's this new book. It's about the history of the air raid passing offense in football, and I'm tying it into this story about sales in the construction industry. And I've been thinking about this for probably 7 or 8 years. I've been writing it for a year and a half. A ton of time and money have gone into it. And I'm scared it's not going to deliver on the promise of what is in my mind. And there's nothing you can do about it. You just got to put it out there, and it's going to do whatever it's going to do. You just got to ship it, and you got to see. So when I look and I see 6'8", 300-pound Taye Diggs, judo champion of the world, I think, all right, I guess we're all fighting our own battles. We're all living inside our own heads too much. And all you can do is try to build a good team around you and try to do your best work and learn from it when it happens. So if you are going through some challenges right now, or you got a big project and confidence is not at an all-time high, that's okay. You can think of my boy, Teddy Riner. Look him up, and hopefully you will immediately feel better about yourself. There are so many talented people in this world who have publicly and privately even more struggled with this idea of imposter syndrome. And we all deal with that at some point. The question is whether or not we really embrace it and understand it and face it head on and then overcome it. So think of Teddy Riner, check him out, and continue on your journey to keep climbing whatever mountain you're climbing right now. All right, from Teddy and Judo, jump over to Ron Wayne and Apple, and maybe you've seen this floating around on Instagram or LinkedIn or Facebook, and it's a picture of a gentlemanly older man. He's in a frumpy gray cardigan with a short white Oxford shirt, sitting at a desk with a whole bunch of garbage around him. And it says, "If you feel unlucky, remember that Ron Wayne sold his 10% stake in Apple for $800. The caption reads, "Ron Wayne, one of Apple's co-founders, made a decision in 1976 that would later become a cautionary tale in the world of business." Wayne sold his 10% stake in Apple for just $800, a move driven by his concerns over the financial risks associated with the new company. At the time, he wanted to avoid being personally liable for any debts Apple might incur, which seemed like a wise decision given the uncertainty of the company's future. And the punchline was returning that $800 for 10% of Apple in 1976 would now be worth $320 billion, which admittedly That's a lot of money. Now, Ron Wayne was born in 1934. He was an incredible engineer. He passed away in 2020. He holds a dozen U.S. patents to his name. He started at Atari, 1973 to 1976. He was a senior designer. He established the official documentation and materials control systems, whatever the hell those are, at Atari. And it was at Atari in a leadership role that he met a young, stinky employee named Steve Jobs. Yes, Steve Jobs went through a period where he just refused to wash himself. It was there that they ran across each other. So with stinky Steve Jobs and bizarro Steve Wozniak, they invite Ron Wayne to join them in the founding of Apple. So Wayne listens, and then he says, why don't you guys come over? He invites him over to his house, and he was going to advise them. Well, in the ensuing 2-hour conversation about technology and business, Jobs says, I'll take 45%. The Woz, he'll take 45%. And you, my friend, Ron Wayne, will get 10% of the company, and he would essentially be the adult in the room. So Ron Wayne drafts the original partnership agreement. Then he creates the first illustrations of the Apple logo, known as the Apple Newton, and he also wrote the Apple I operations manual. However, about 2 weeks later, he starts reconsidering this whole thing. He had originally started his own company that was one of the first electronic slot machines. And while a great idea, a great feat of engineering, it was a failure. It took him over a year to pay off all his old debts. He was very risk adverse. And Jobs and Wozniak expected him to, in theory, manage, possibly indefinitely, the whole Apple corporation. So Wayne later rethinks this thing, gives the money back and says, thanks, but no thanks, gentlemen. And he has stated over the decades that he does not regret selling his share of the company, as he made the quote-unquote best decision based on the information available at the time. And he said, given the risks and stresses of staying with Apple, he quote-unquote probably would have wound up the richest man in the cemetery. Now, I bring this up because it is being used as a punchline to say, look at this guy, this idiot. $800, it could have been worth $320 billion. And while I understand that, and sure, that in theory seems like a foolish move, but here's the thing. What if this guy was already successful? What if he already knew what he wanted and he knew what enough was? And I think if we take a step back, Apple came out really hot and immediately changed the industry. However, once IBM realized what was happening in the personal computing market, came back strong and overtook Apple. Apple rode up high and then dropped way down and was bouncing along bankruptcy, and IBM owned the market that Apple created. And if you've read any biography of Steve Jobs, or if you've watched any of the 5 movies or documentaries about him, he was a giant asshole. And he was there from 1976 to 1985. So this would mean if you're Ron Wayne, you're a quiet engineer, you like hunkering down and making models and just nerding out, you are going to have to manage Steve Jobs for 7 years. Yeah, that probably would have killed him. But no, that's not it. Then Steve Jobs leaves. He's gone for a decade. Then he comes back, stabs the existing CEO in the back, and then takes over, and it goes on to riches. So I think we look at the end and are thinking, $320 billion, what an idiot, Ron Wayne. He's probably right. And maybe he said, you know what, the goal isn't for me to make $1 billion, it's for me not to die. And maybe he was a person who said, when I think about relationships, I'm thinking about 3 types of relationships, and none of them have to do with money. It's relationships with people that I love being around, that challenge me, that make me a better person. It's relationships with ideas that challenge me and make me excited. And it's these ideas around a craft that I can continue doing something, getting better at it, pursuing mastery for my entire life. And this is exactly what he did with engineering. Or maybe Ron Wayne saw in the future, or he intuited what Bronnie Ware would write about in her fantastic yet sad but really important book, The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying. This book that I've talked about, a couple hundred episodes ago, really impactful for me. It's something that I think about often, is what do most people say when they are on their deathbed? And there are 5 regrets that Bronnie has identified. And sadly, I have lived long enough to understand that a few of these are true for people that I love that have been in my life. And I think maybe you have too. Number one is I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life that others expected of me. Number two, I wish I hadn't worked so hard. Number three, I wished I'd had the courage to express my feelings. Number four, I wish I had stayed in touch with my friends. And number five, I wish I had let myself be happier. So I was thinking about this recently when we had Mr. Tom Asacker. He joined the show on episode number 399, and he has a new book out called Unwinding Want, which is all about really trying to understand, what do we want? What do we really want? What do we think we want? What do other people want for us? And if you are looking for something that might be a philosophy to try to understand your own desires and hopes and dreams, it's a small book with a really powerful message that's called Unwinding Want. And in it, he mentions Bronnie Ware and these top 5 regrets of the dying. So back to Ron Wayne. Is he bummed he missed out on $320 billion? I don't know. I hope not. Now, his kids, probably. His grandkids, for sure. His great-grandkids, yeah. His great-grandkids are going to be pissed at him their entire life. But they have no reason to be. And maybe not. Maybe he didn't want billions of dollars. Have you ever heard any stories, let alone read a book about the Vanderbilt's fortune from Commodore Vanderbilt, who was once the richest man in the world because of the railroads? Just look at what generational wealth did to them. It's horrifying. So maybe wanting to make $1 billion isn't a great idea. So I will close out this segment speculating what Ron Wayne might say to me if he were alive and we were talking about this in theory, $300 billion that were lost. I think he might say, you know what, Bradley, have you ever seen that scene in Good Will Hunting between Sean and Will when they're talking about the World Series game with Pudge Fisk when he hit the dinger against the Cincinnati Reds in Game 6? Do you remember that scene?
Bottom of the 12th, in stepped Carlton Fisk. Old Pudge.
Steps up to the plate, he's got that weird stance.
Yeah.
And then, boom! He clocks it, High fly ball on the left field line. 35,000 people on their feet, yelling at the ball, but that's nothing because Fisk, he's waving at the ball like a madman. He's going, get over, get over, get over. And then it hits a foul pole. Oh, he goes in. And 35,000 fans, they charge the field,
Yeah, and he's blowing
he's like, going, get on the get out of the way. Bangs it.
I believe you had tickets to that game.
Yeah.
Did you rush the field?
No, I didn't rush the field. I wasn't there. What? No, I was in a bar having a drink with my future wife.
That's the scene. I'm sure he would have said, yeah, well, I didn't know it was going to be worth $320 billion, but hopefully he was happy nonetheless. And he felt he made the right decision and didn't let it worry about him because money isn't what matters. Now, the goal in life should be to want what you already have. And if you're constantly wanting other things, which I think is part of human nature, well, that might not be the most satisfactory way to live. And that, my friends, brings us to the third story. We're going to be talking about negotiation fundamentals and Sriracha. Is that how you say it? Words that start with S and then have the consonant R right next to it kind of confuse me. Is it Sriracha? I don't know. I'm going with Sriracha. I think that's it. And this is a story about two companies, two partners that over time grew an incredible product, a pair of incredible enterprises, and had it all fall down because of a failure to remember one of the most important aspects of negotiation, which is, you have probably heard us as BATNA, which is best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And in my book on negotiation, I refer to its opposite, its corollary, which is a WATNA, a worst alternative to a negotiated agreement. And oftentimes when we're talking about BATNA, which is the deal doesn't happen, but what do we want the next best thing to be? Or if we're thinking of a pre-mortem, let's think of the worst case scenario and reverse engineer to ensure that that doesn't happen, to minimize that risk. It's often hard to find a really good analogy, and we end up kind of making up stories or hypotheticals. This story is a perfect explanation of it. So you got two main characters here. You got Craig Underwood, who's in his 80s now, and he owns Underwood Ranches. And then you got David Tran, who's a Vietnamese refugee, and David Tran starts the most iconic Sriracha sauce ever. It's the one with the rooster on it and the green top. I'm sure you've seen it. It became the number 3 hot sauce brand in America. And these two men, as I will quote from this article that came in Fortune magazine in March of 2024, the two men came from different worlds, but they had a lot in common. Soft-spoken patriarchs with kind eyes and faces craggy with laugh lines, both had remained workaholics late into their 70s. Over the 28 years they'd been in business, the two had broken bread together with their wives, watched each other's children grow up, stood together through hard times and business crises. They had even met up with their families to talk about succession. So David Tran started small. He was just trying to sell this sauce to his Vietnamese friends. And then he just kind of came in at the right time, really rode the wave in the mid to late 90s. With the foodie craze. And the quote is, although it wasn't offered to customers, there was always a bottle of the quote unquote rooster sauce on the table during staff meals. It was used by the Latino and Asian cooks to basically add chili heat to anything. This catches on and then just blows up in a positive way. So as David Tran's Sriracha business grew, so did Tran's need for massive quantities of chilies, and Underwood kept increasing the farm's pepper fields, reducing his other crops. Working together, the two companies kept up ramping yields and production to a height of 100 million pounds of peppers in 2015. So Craig Underwood is only farming these peppers. He went from 400 acres of peppers to 3,000 acres of peppers for one client. And that is Mr. David Tran and this Sriracha sauce. Every year, 100 million pounds of peppers. I can't even imagine what that looks like. So this article fails to really tell a decent story about what actually happened. And I don't think it matters. There was a dispute. There was a crisis. There was a he said, she said, trust was broken. And now they split apart. So David Tran and his Sriracha sauce had one farmer who supplied 100 million pounds of peppers to him. He doesn't have that anymore. Meanwhile, you got a farmer. He has one product, peppers, 3,000 acres. He's got one client, and that's over. So these guys are an hour and a half apart, and after 30 years and making millions of dollars and on the precipice of dominating the Sriracha market, a disagreement breaks all of it. So now they don't even talk. They hate each other. There was a lawsuit. Both of them kind of lost in the lawsuit. Now Craig Underwood is starting his own Dragon Sriracha sauce. And you know who the big winner is in all of this? The giant conglomerate, the McElhaney Company, which owns Tabasco. When this fight came in, they couldn't get nearly enough of the Sriracha sauce out there. On the black market, these bottles went for $80 a piece during the pandemic. People were going nuts, and into the fray comes Tabasco, and now they dominate the market. The article reads, one man with thousands of pepper fields, but nobody to buy his peppers. Another with a massive pepper factory and not enough peppers to keep it running. Meanwhile, an adoring fan base pines for the product the men made together, even as the two remain estranged, victims perhaps of their own runaway success. So what's the takeaway here? Well, we come back to this idea of BATNA, best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So now let's return to negotiation fundamentals, BATNA and WATNA. I like starting with the WATNA. What's the worst alternative to a negotiated agreement? So if I'm David Tran, I got my Sriracha, and I'm Craig Underwood, and I got 3,000 acres of one crop, what's the worst alternative to a negotiated agreement? This outcome. You and I, we ruin both of our businesses. We spend too much time and money in court, and then we just have to go start over again instead of just raking in millions of dollars a year. This is the worst. This is also not crazy unpredictable. They should have thought about this and said, no matter what happens, we can't do this. So do we partner up? Do we figure out some other solution? Do we bring in some third party to help us devise a way so we don't let something small and stupid kill this amazing thing that we've built and can continue to build? So that's that. So spending some time thinking about that in a pre-mortem, pre-thinking about what could kill you, and then reverse engineering to make sure that doesn't happen is an important exercise. Now let's go to bat now. What's the best alternative to a negotiated agreement? Now, I do have the benefit of hindsight. So knowing that, here's what I would say. If you're thinking about this idea of the best alternative to a negotiated agreement, you would go and say, David Tran, Craig Underwood, let's get together and say, if there's ever an argument or a disagreement or something that is going to split us, let's proactively plan out the best way to dissolve this. So let's think of a worst case scenario and then make sure it's not the worst. It's just we split our businesses. And maybe that looks like if X or Y or Z happens, or for any reason you say to do this, we would have a 36-month period where we unwind the business. No abrupt change. You and I find that we can part ways, but do it amicably over time, so we are both successful. Now, I don't know the particulars of this, but what I do know is you can't allow the somewhat predictable worst case scenario to happen that could just tear apart your business and then give all the market share to the monster in the category who's just sitting around doing nothing, and you just gift them all of that. Is such a brutal story. So I do believe there is some lessons here. This is a giant cautionary tale. This is a fun read, and thinking about that proactively and working backwards will help you enjoy life and minimize the worst things that could happen. And that is all I have to say on this topic. So my friends, this is a little grab bag of an episode, a little bit different. Love to hear your feedback, good, bad, or otherwise. Feel free to email me directly at info@bradleyhartmanandco.com. And if you have any other amazing stories you think I should read and potentially share with our audience, you can hit me up there. I'm going to close out, my friends, like we always do. You are owed nothing. Deliver value first. Make it a great week.